Chen Fan discovered that he had come to ancient times. The clothes are her own, and the body is also her own. But how has the skin become tender and the face seems childish? She is still on her escape route and needs to find a place to stay. She has no registered residence, so she has to earn money to earn registered residence, build houses, and buy land. A young man walked over and asked her for advice on how to farm. Keywords of the novel. No pop-ups for the female protagonist of the farming industry. Download the complete TXT collection of the female protagonist of the farming industry, and read the latest chapters of the female protagonist of the farming industry. Can the eyes see clearly again in Chapter 1? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Can the eyes see clearly again in Chapter 1? It's so uncomfortable. Chen Fan couldn't catch his breath, feeling his nose and mouth blocked by something. His whole body was squeezed to the point of exploding, and there was a powerful force struggling and impacting his chest. She wanted to open her mouth and let the force break free from her, but her mouth couldn't open and her throat couldn't even make a swallowing motion. She tried hard to open her eyes, but her eyelids were heavy and she couldn't open them. She seemed to be spinning and falling. How could this be? Did she have a nightmare on the plane? After an unknown amount of time, the feeling of suffocation and dizziness gradually dissipated, and the body no longer seemed to explode. The consciousness seemed to be clearer. She tried several times in a daze and finally opened her eyes, seeing a blue sky above her head. Turn your head and look left and right, it's obvious that it's not on the plane. She was so shocked that she immediately sat up and found herself in a strange place. No one. There are only piles of various objects scattered horizontally and vertically on the ground. I'm already awake, why is it still like I'm in a dream? She couldn't believe she was in such a strange situation. For the first time in her life, she pinched herself to confirm if it was a dream. Pain. It's not a dream. But where is this? What about the plane she was on? What about the other people on the plane? She instinctively went to help her glasses, wanting to see more clearly, but didn't reach out. She continued to help, but still didn't, only touching the mask on her face. Are you still wearing a mask? No wonder I can't catch my breath. She pulled off her mask and folded it twice, then casually put it into her pocket and looked at the scene before her. Clothes, shoes, bags, boxes. All clearly visible. Did she suddenly regain her vision? How could it be? She shook her head. Looking again, it's still very clear. She pinched her leg again, but it still hurts. It's not a dream. Her eyes can see things clearly again, she really wants to jump a few times. She really jumped, and suddenly felt dizzy, as if she had fallen off a high platform, her feet not standing firm, and she fell one by one from her buttocks to her back and head to the ground in an instant. She couldn't help but let out an ah. Woo-woo, what exactly is this place? How could it still collapse? Zhang Xi looked at the figure suddenly falling from afar, his eyes widened, and his hand involuntarily grasped the hilt of the sword. Butler Fenglin said incoherently, is this? This just fell off. Yes, it's human, isn't it? Guard Mo Jian widened his eyes and poked Xiang Jian beside him, asking softly, did you see someone fall? Xiang Jian also widened his eyes and answered softly, yes, I saw it. It's a girl. Was there anyone on the tree before? No one. I looked at those trees just now. Where did she fall from? Didn't you see the tree clearly just now? I don't know. Maybe I didn't see it clearly. But I think I just saw it clearly. There are only a few leaves on the tree in total. Chen Fan fell into a daze, as if hearing a voice ringing out, blurry and buzzing. Someone. She rolled over and got up, and saw some people in front of her. They were looking at her in surprise, and someone looked up. Chen Fan also looked up and saw that it was a big tree with few leaves and all of it was dry. Do they think she fell from a tree? Wait. They are wearing ancient costumes. Chen Fan was stunned. After calming down, she looked at those people again, and indeed they were all wearing ancient-style clothing. She looked around in confusion. A long dirt road with several dead trees on the roadside. On both sides of the road are vast stretches of land, with no trace of water, only countless cracks crisscrossing like deep grooves. There are several clumps of plants with withered stems standing there. In the distance, there are several villages scattered in the shape of bungalows. There are many people walking slowly on the road. Look ahead, all the way to the end of the road. Looking back, there is still an endless stream of people walking towards this side. They are basically very thin, with a face as pale as earth, sunken eye sockets, and their bodies wanting to collapse. Their clothes are all very old, some even very torn, stained with countless layers of ash and mud. Time traveled. She looked at the clothes on her body, they were her own. This body feeling is also her own. Sigh. Who will tell her what situation she has encountered? A childish male voice shouted, "Drive, drive, do trees have locks?" Lock. What lock? Chen Fan was stunned for a moment, followed the sound and saw a 4 or 5-year-old boy not far away being held in his mother's arms, looking at her. Chen Fan suddenly realized, was he calling her sister? Is it asking if she has a snake? This question diluted a little panic in my heart. Someone is talking to her. She seems to understand. She smiled and imitated the little boy's accent, "There are no snakes on the tree." The little boy asked her again, "Is there any delicious fruit on the tree?" He understood her words now. She really understood the boy's words just now. She smiled even happier and said, "There are no fruits to eat on the tree." The boy's mother looked very nervous, holding him tightly with one hand and covering his mouth with the other. The little boy struggled and dodged, saying the third sentence to Chen Fan. "Is there a bird's nest on the tree?" "There is no bird's nest on the tree." The little boy didn't ask again. He probably didn't know what to ask next, so he stopped. Chen Fan didn't speak anymore. She understood the mother's concern. She suddenly fell from the tree like this, which may not be considered a normal person in the eyes of many people. Waist hanging. Waist hanging. The sound system started again. Chen Fan looked around in confusion and found an old man staring at her slightly further away, with both fear and anger in his eyes. Waist hanging. Monsters. Did the old man treat her like a monster? Why? Chen Fan lowered his head and looked at himself. Black sports shoes, loose black cotton pants, a chestnut cotton and linen top, and a diagonal waistband. She is dressed in cloth, which is very similar to those ordinary people who wear clothes and pants. Her shoes are not eye-catching, so she shouldn't look like an outsider in this era. It's just that the clothes and pants are dust-free and have no holes. They are new and different from those around them. The old man pointed at her and said, "Hang on your waist. Didn't you have it just now?" So there was a grid. The old man's words were not in Mandarin, but Chen Fan could understand his meaning. As long as you can roughly understand, it will automatically become Mandarin. Someone beside him looked at the old man strangely and said, "What did you say? What didn't happen, what appeared?" The old man trembled in his voice and said, She wasn't on the tree just now," and suddenly fell off the tree. The person next to him still didn't understand. "Did you just have a dazed look? It seems like she's not easy to see from crouching on a tree in this outfit. We're all so hungry that it's possible that you didn't see clearly." After saying these words, the person's breath became unstable. The old man persisted, "She really appeared suddenly. You see how good she looks, she must have eaten a lot of people's food. Encounter and fate, thank you to my precious children for discovering my book. After reading the first chapter, if you feel good, use your golden fingers to vote. The book has been shelved, and monthly tickets are even more welcome. End of this chapter. Chapter 2, She Remembered. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2, She Remembered. Chen Fan was a bit nervous, lowered his head, not looking at them, afraid that the old man would be even more scared when he saw her gaze, and also afraid that those previously numb refugees would be influenced by the old man and have extremist thoughts towards her. The person next to him became impatient and panted heavily. Okay, she's a monster that will make you speak calmly here. I see she's always standing there well. The old man's monster comments didn't splash any water. Except for the person next to him who had a few words with him, the others at most glanced at Chen Fan without saying a word. After taking a break, they continued on their journey. The old man stopped talking when no one paid attention to him anymore. He watched as the people walked past Chen Fan without any problems, and bravely walked past him. Seeing Chen Fan motionless, he breathed a sigh of relief and continued walking trembling. Chen Fan stood for a while before lifting his head and looking around. No one paid attention to her on the way, and she breathed a sigh of relief. Zhang Xi looked quietly at the figure under the tree in the distance, his eyebrows furrowed slightly. Fengmin whispered beside him, "Young master," Abbot Yanxi said. "Perhaps I missed it just now," Zhang Xi interrupted him, gripping the hilt tighter. Fengmin muttered to himself on the side, "Is she feeling anxious? She must be homesick, right? She." His words were interrupted again. "You go take a look on the road." Fengmin chuckled lightly and walked towards the roadside with his hands behind his back. There were many refugees crowded on the road. When they saw Fengmin approaching, some immediately looked away, some lowered their heads, and some still stared straight at the 3 carriages on the roadside. Fengmin took their expressions into his eyes and walked to a carriage. He patted the coachman's shoulder and slightly lifted his chin, and the coachman entered the carriage. He looked back at Zhang Xi and saw his young master still staring blankly into the distance. He couldn't help but let out a soft sigh and continued to look at the people on the road. They stayed here because the group of people who were rushing ahead suddenly stopped, and they followed suit. Guard Qingji got off the car and went to the crowd to check. When he returned, he reported to Zhang Xi that several people had fainted. "Take a bag of rice soup and feed them. Let's take a break and park the carriage in the fields by the roadside," Zhang Xi instructed. Everyone got off their horses and cars, stood and rested, observing the situation around them. Who knew that after a while, they saw something suddenly fall from the tree ahead. Qin Zheng and Chu Sheng from the carriage behind also got off and approached Mo Jian and the others. Qin Zheng whispered to Mo Jian, "What are you looking at?" Mo Jian pointed to a tree in front of him and said, "Look at a person under that tree." "What do people look good at? Aren't people everywhere here?" Chu Sheng muttered inwardly, but didn't say anything, just staring at the tree. At this moment, Chen Fan was looking around in fear. Chu Sheng immediately widened his eyes, a girl so black yet so handsome. Hey! Why did she turn around again? I haven't seen it clearly yet. Chu Sheng blinked and asked Mo Jian, "Did you just look at that girl? Are you actually looking at that girl?" Mo Jian lowered his voice and said, "She fell from the tree just now." "No, she fell from mid-air." Chu Sheng's eyes lit up as he was about to ask, but Qin Jing grabbed him and said, "Let's get on the carriage." Chu Sheng remained silent. Everyone stood there, watching as she stood under the tree for a while, walked behind the tree, carried her back to the road, and sat down against the tree. She is ready to think carefully. The already unstable leaves on the branches swayed gently and fell, with a few still falling on Chen Fan's head and hands. The bark-peeled trunk is also very rough, causing a slight pain on the back. These slight yet refreshing tactile sensations gave Chen Fan a clear sense of presence. Some memories flooded out of my mind. She remembered that there was a sudden violent jolt while flying, followed by earth-shattering sounds and dazzling flames. At this point, she could no longer doubt what she had experienced on that plane and what she was currently experiencing. She is really in a brand new and unfamiliar world. Her conversation with the boy just now was the first 3 sentences she said in this world, and it was her first interaction with this world. Is that place just now a crack that appeared in time and space? She went from the world she was in, crossed the cracks of time and space, and fell into this era. She was glad she was still alive, but she couldn't see her relatives anymore, and her relatives couldn't see her either. Chen Fan buried his head and burst into tears. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Fighting. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Fighting. After not crying for a while, Chen Fan stopped, wiped away her tears, and opened her eyes. Why did she suddenly squat in a strange place and bury her head in tears? This is very embarrassing and also very dangerous. If someone bumped into her and stepped on her, it wouldn't be good. If someone comes to hit her and stab her, and she only cries but doesn't notice and react in time, it will be very tragic. She turned her head to look at the road, and a new group of people sat down to rest. What's the attraction of this place? People like to stop here to rest. Chen Fan stretched his head and looked into the distance, with several clusters of people resting along the way. Oh, it turns out that people are stopping everywhere. Some people noticed that Chen Fan turned his head to look at them, with tears on his face. He was not surprised, not puzzled, not watching, and still sat there resting with them as they were. Some people didn't even look towards Chen Fan. Although those people didn't stare at her, she still felt a bit uneasy in her heart. Just now, her emotions collapsed too quickly and she couldn't hold back. In the future, she still needs to pay more attention and control herself to avoid falling into a dangerous situation. She took a deep breath and tried to calm her emotions. My eyes are still a bit sour and blurry. Chen Fan reached out and wiped them. She made a new discovery. Her hands were yellow, even a bit black. Take a closer look, it is indeed like that. I rolled up my sleeve again and saw that my wrist was also black, yellow, black, and yellow. She wiped the back of her hand, but it was still black. Oh, how could that be like this? Her skin has always been very white, and people around her say she is white. Currently, she has this kind of yellow and slightly black skin. She didn't even sun out so dark every day during the summer vacation. She can't bear it, her eyes can see her clearly and she is very happy. She can't bear it when her skin is not white anymore. She suspected that her soul did not return to its original position synchronously. From waking up until now, she has been slowly and gradually perceiving her own situation and the world around her, sensing a little, and then sensing a little more. She even wondered if she still had some consciousness that had not returned, and she would have to wait a little longer to realize it. There were chaotic footsteps coming, and Chen Fan immediately stood up, turned around, and took a few steps back. The refugees on the road shrank their bodies. A group of people ran over, a few ran towards the refugees, and a few stood in front of Chen Fan, 2 or 3 meters away. That's 3 men, they look a bit sturdy and probably haven't been hungry much. Is this a robbery? She just arrived here and had to deal with the robbery. The 3 of them looked at Chen Fan with a lewd expression, and Chen Fan suddenly felt a wave of nausea. They also saw Zhang Xiai. Fengmin shouted, "Quick!" and Xiang Jian flew out. The scarred face in the middle spoke with an accent that he didn't know how to describe. "Little girl, your clothes are quite new and beautiful." Chen Fan remained silent, feeling very angry in her heart. Dealing with a little girl and deploying 3 people is really malicious. Scar's face spoke again and said, "What else is good on your body? Let's take a look." Chen Fan remained silent and clenched his fist. There were already cries and screams from the refugees' side, and she became even angrier as she listened. The 3 of them became impatient and rushed towards Chen Fan. She kicked the scarred face in the middle and front, kicking the person towards the withered tree she had just sat on. Then, with a swing of her left arm, her fist went out, and her right leg took advantage of the situation to kick. The remaining two of them also fell. The tree was still creaking, shaking off the last few withered leaves and dropping 2 dead branches. Chen Fan stood there with a calm face, staring coldly at them. Xiang Jian, who arrived quickly, stopped not far away and touched his head. Those 3 people were not afraid of being beaten. After a brief fall and scream, they quickly got up and charged towards her together without saying a word of nonsense. Several bandits who robbed the refugees also rushed towards Chen Fan. Chen Fan quickly squatted down, grabbed the arm that was first extended on the left, and swung it towards the right rear. He kicked his leg up and, taking advantage of the person's forward momentum, twisted his waist and swung in a circle, and the person was thrown out. With such a squat and shake, the other 2 failed to catch her in the first place, and were also hit by the one who swung half a circle and flew out, retreating backwards. Chen Fan made 2 turns, hitting one person with a bent leg, and then hitting another person, causing both of them to fall and sit on the ground. For the others who rushed up, Chen Fan grabbed one with both hands and threw it to the ground, causing the person to fall to the ground without moving, another leg sweep, 1 spin kick, and 2 were knocked down. There were still 2 people left, and Chen Fan kicked one person in the stomach, kicking him 2 meters away, and then punched the last person to the ground. They lay on the ground, panting heavily. Chen Fan didn't take any more action and looked at them with his hips crossed, adjusting his breathing. The refugees fell silent for an instant, followed by a burst of cheers. Emotions are strong and the volume is weak. Has the girl learned kung fu? One person exclaimed with joy. The girl looked thin, but she didn't expect her strength to be so strong. The group of people were quite strong, and she threw them away with just 1 kick, and they kicked them far away. Someone was sighing again. What's the use of throwing it out? We should kill them all. A voice of indignation sounded. Everyone was surprised and looked at the speaker. That is a little girl in her teens, thin and black, dressed in tattered clothes, but with neatly combed hair and 2 small braids tied with red headbands. Seeing everyone looking over, she pursed her lips and said, "If we don't kill them, they will continue to rob people and things." Chen Fan looked at the little girl and said, "I've never killed anyone. She's just a student, not a killer. She has been an obedient girl for 18 years, and today is still her first real fight. How could she possibly take action and kill someone? They have so many people, and they are so strong. How could they be killed with just 1 punch?" Someone trembled and helped Chen Fan speak. "If you can't die with your fist, use a knife," the little girl said as she took out a firewood knife from the burden beside her and walked towards someone else. Scared Face stood up, kicked her in the back, pinned her to the ground, and cursed profusely. The firewood knife slipped away and hit her hand as she lay down. Chen Fan stepped forward and kicked his scarred face out. The little girl grabbed the firewood knife and chopped it towards Chen Fan's foot, causing everyone to scream. Chen Fan naturally moved away and immediately kicked the firewood knife far away, angrily looking at the girl and saying, "I don't know what to do. I just saved you." The little girl glared at Chen Fan with hatred and said, "Can't you do it earlier? If you do it earlier, I can still kill him." Everyone. End of this chapter. What should she do in chapter 4? You are listening at novelfull.audio. What should she do in chapter 4? A middle-aged couple rushed over and helped the little girl up. The woman helped her walk back to the original place, while the man went and picked up the firewood knife. A few refugees took 2 steps forward and then stopped, as if hesitating about something. Chen Fan didn't look at them. If you dare not even retrieve your belongings, how can you protect yourself in the later journey? After a while of psychological construction, the refugees bravely rushed forward and took away some of the belongings of the bandits. Those bandits were also interesting. When they rushed towards Chen Fan, they didn't forget to put the things they had snatched into their pockets, tucked them under their armpits, and draped them over their shoulders. When they threw them to the ground, they didn't hesitate to let go. Someone continued to fight, but the bandits shouted out, "That's not yours." Chen Fan looked up at the refugees, and some of them withdrew their hands and walked back. The little girl continued to take things, but was punched by a bandit and fell to the ground. She got up and ran away. A few of them also got into a fight with the bandits, continued to grab some things, and then ran to the road to stop a few who looked even more destitute than them. They sent out their belongings separately and said a few more words. Those who were down and out also turned their heads to look at Chen Fan. Chen Fan looked at them calmly. A few refugees walked up to her and bowed, bowing and thanking her. She shook her hand and said, "You don't need to thank me, I didn't specifically go to save you." A middle-aged man said, "Miss, you beat those people down and brought back all our things. After all, it's still Miss who helped us. I wonder where Miss is going. If it's the same way, can we go with Mississippi? Are you on the same route?" She doesn't know where she's going either. She looked at those grinning bandits, they were still here, that's all you said. The few refugees finished speaking and didn't wait for Chen Fan to respond before they dispersed and said to go pick up their luggage. A few bandits clumsily got up on the ground, gathered together, ready to leave. A sound of ah came over, mixed with the chaotic and heavy footsteps. Surprisingly, it was a group of refugees carrying hoes and wielding kitchen knives. Wave after wave of people rushed to behind Chen Fan, and a long stretch of road suddenly appeared on the way. The field suddenly formed a tripartite situation. Chen Fan. The refugees who rushed over quickly collapsed. Those who sat on the ground with weak legs, those who stumbled on the ground, and those who tripped over those in front. The ones that stopped were also gasping for breath. At the forefront of the team is the little girl. She pointed at the gang of bandits and said, "They can't move anymore. If they kill you, it's yours." As soon as she spoke, the group's eyes lit up with green light. The bandits shouted a vulgar sentence in an unusually consistent tone, causing the group of refugees to tremble. The next second, they all raised their hoes and swung their knives in unison. It turns out that combat effectiveness can also be intimidated. Both sides faced off for a moment, and no one took action first. Chen Fan looked at the situation and felt very embarrassed. What should she do? Help refugees fight bandits. If the bandits were chopped and stewed by that group of people, she would help them become demons. Helping bandits deal with refugees. The nature is the same. If the bandits were to take action this time, they wouldn't just be grabbing things. Defeat both factions. She couldn't do it for a while. Let them both suffer losses. I'm sure some refugees behind her will have thoughts they shouldn't have. What should I do? As the two teams were about to clash, the tense atmosphere suddenly dissipated, and a strange expression appeared on the faces of the bandits. The refugees have begun to tremble and show fear on their faces. Chen Fan looked at them strangely, and the group of people behind her hummed softly before stopping. Chen Fan also felt at this moment that the air pressure on the field seemed to be very low, and her chest was feeling uncomfortable. It seems like there is a powerful force enveloping everyone, making them gasp for breath. She took a slow and deep breath, then carefully exhaled out. The weapons in the hands of the refugees have dropped one after another, some even hitting the feet of others, but no one has let out even the slightest scream. The overwhelming pressure was still penetrating and spreading, and Chen Fan could clearly feel the faint chill on his back. She watched as the group of refugees and bandits collapsed like grass blown by a strong wind, with thumping sounds behind them. Scar's face clenched its fist and gritted its teeth, finally able to howl out loud. "Great hero, spare your life. Great hero, spare your life. We dare not dare again." The murderous aura instantly disappeared, and Chen Fan felt his body relax a bit. The bandit struggled to get up first and stumbled away. The group of refugees also trembled slightly and got up, but couldn't hold their kitchen knives and firewood knives. They decided not to take them anymore and stumbled back. Those in better condition dragged their hoe handles, dragged a few steps, and also threw the hoe down. Chen Fan wanted to turn her head to see if there were any mysterious figures, but her neck seemed to freeze and she didn't follow her brain's ideas. When she finally turned her head, where else could there be any mysterious figure? The road is empty, and no other refugees can be seen walking for hundreds of meters. Only a pile of black and dense piles can be seen far away. Even so, many refugees on the road were scared away by that murderous aura. There are some who are scared away, while the majority take the initiative to turn around and run. I heard the people behind me say there was a grain claim, so I immediately turned back. Layer by layer, the refugees on the road retreated a lot, leaving such a long way open. When Xiang Jian flew back, he saw that the ground around their carriage was filled with people. A big iron pot is on the rack, cooking congee. Xiang Jian looked at their young master and his face looked a bit ugly. He asked Mo Jian quietly, "Why did you cook congee today? Didn't you just send food? You look." Mo Jian didn't answer, he just threw the long whip in his hand into the air, making a crisp sound. The refugees sitting on the ground shook their bodies and sat more properly. Xiang Jian touched her nose and moved to Zhang Xi's side to report the situation on Chen Fan's side. "What do you think of that girl's martial arts?" Foman asked Xiang Jian. The movements were very agile, with great strength. It seemed like there was no internal strength, so it was just hard work. She didn't hit hard either. When those people threw or fell to the ground, the force applied to them had already dissipated. They wouldn't break their arms or legs, and their internal organs wouldn't be injured. It was just that they fell in pain and had no strength. Zhang Xi nodded slightly and said, "You go follow us for a while longer, wait for us to come over." Xiang Jian was stunned for a moment, then nodded and said yes before preparing to leave. Mo Jian glanced at it and hesitated to speak. End of this chapter. Chapter 5 is all about poor people. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 is all about poor people. You can go too, Zhang Xi said softly. Mo Jian responded joyfully and walked away with Xiang Jian hooked on their shoulders. The group of refugees behind Chen Fan gradually returned to normal, packing up their luggage in small groups. Chen Fan approached a few people and asked where they came from. A young man in his 20s was more lively and spoke up first. "We are from Ningkang County in Yuzhou, and we are all of a big family. The person who talked to you just now is my father. We passed through Dakong County in Ningkang County and arrived at Yongchang County in Shizhou, which is Xingping County in Pingzhou. We have been walking for 12 days, and in 2 or 3 days, we can reach Yuanfeng County in Qingzhou. Yuanfeng County is a good place, and there is hope when we reach Yuanfeng County." Chen Fan silently recited the place name in his heart and roughly associated a few words. Fortunately, apart from those place names, the young man did not come up with any vocabulary beyond Chen Fan's understanding, and the pronunciation was not difficult to distinguish. Today, without realizing it, she also heard several people speak, and surprisingly, she could roughly understand them. This is really thanks to her classmates from all over the world, as well as the many dialect videos she has watched and learned over the years. She asked again, "How long has it been dry in your area?" "It started in midsummer last year and never rained until autumn or winter. This spring, even during rainy seasons like Qingming grain rain, only a drizzle dripped, and the soil couldn't even get wet. I couldn't even get a few drops of water to cook a meal." Chen Fan was stunned. "It's almost a drought all year round, right?" The young man's voice continued, "Fortunately, last year when the wheat was harvested, there was some food to eat, and some millet was planted. In a few months, the water in Tangtangu was all dry, even the big lake was getting drier. The millet harvest was not good, but it was finally harvested a little. Later, the wheat turned into flour when planted, and only a few acres of land saw a single seedling standing there, still not growing much. Vegetables were also not planted. Corn. Wheat. Do you usually grow rice? Sometimes we also grow rice, but not very much. We eat a lot of noodles and millet there, and occasionally we mix some brown rice. Last year, due to drought, we couldn't grow rice anymore. As millet is drought resistant, we have grown it all. The young man didn't continue speaking, panting heavily there. He probably just hung on for a few breaths, but suddenly opened the conversation basket and said so much, consuming most of those breaths. A woman next to her spoke with a smile and said, "Miss, your voice is so beautiful. I don't know where your accent is from." This young man's name is Zhou Qiang, and my surname is Fang. He is his second aunt. How do you call Mississippi? Chen Fan said hello and said, "Hello Aunt Fang and Brother Zhou." He casually pointed north and said, "My surname is Chen, I'm from the north." Aunt Fang let out a sigh and Zhou Qiang smiled shyly. Aunt Fang continued to ask with a smile, "There is a capital in the north. Miss, is it from either the capital or a certain state?" Chen Fan didn't know how to say it, she only heard a few place names from Zhou Qiang in total, and it's easy to deceive her by talking nonsense. She can't say she fell from mid-air, can she? Aunt Fang continued, "The girl is really good looking, and the material of her clothes is really good." Chen Fan looked at his hand, it was so black, and his face didn't know what it looked like. Why does Aunt Fang think that she is so black and pretty? The clothes on her body are very ordinary, not a fancy dress, and the material is not particularly special. Perhaps it's quite good compared to the tattered clothes of refugees. Zhou Chang's family gradually gathered together, with a few new members added. The other refugees are also relatively close to the same family, and their families are clearly distinguished. That little girl and her parents are still here. She ran away just now, but then came back to find her parents and family. Those newly added ones all seem easy to bully. A pair of skinny siblings, with a younger sister who is only 5 or 6 years old, and an older brother who is in his teens and not tall, looking weak and weak. They were actually a bit far away from here, and Zhou Chang's father ran back for a while before bringing them over. "Do you know they're behind?" Chen Fan asked Zhou Chang's father. No, he shook his head. "I just wanted to go back and see if there was anyone in need of help. I looked at their siblings as if they didn't have much to eat, so I gave them some food and brought them over. Just give them something to eat and leave with the people, and those 2 children are not afraid of being abducted." Chen Fan is a bit worried. However, they are likely to see themselves fighting, and I believe it is safer to follow them. Chen Fan looked at the brother and said, "Where are your family members?" The boy had a gloomy expression and pointed ahead without speaking. "My family walked up to the front and left them behind." "Is that what you mean?" Chen Fan didn't say anything and went to ask a woman with 2 girls, "Where are your family members?" The woman's eyes turned red and she remained silent. She shook her head and pointed her finger in another direction. "Oh, it's a few more who were left behind by their families. Perhaps the man is gone, and the rest of the family finds them burdensome. They were walking in another direction, and as the women walked, they came here. There is also a thin old lady with a little girl, who looks like grandparents and grandchildren." Chen Fan still said, "Where are your family members?" Both of them had red eyes and shook their heads without using their fingers. These 2 people were not left behind, but it seems that their family members are all gone. They are all pitiful people. Chen Fan felt pity and admiration in his heart. They were so old, weak, and young, looking like they had nothing to eat and had to face several robberies, yet they managed to survive with such tenacious vitality. A group of people continued to set off, and Chen Fan walked slowly with the crowd. Xiang Jian and Mo Jian watched from a distance. The walking speed of those people is really slow, but Chen Fan is not in a hurry. She has just experienced so much and is still a bit confused. She also needs to walk while putting her spiritual consciousness back in place, making her perception of this environment clearer and clearer. It's really uncomfortable to suddenly fall into such a desperate situation. She has no money or food, some refugees may go crazy at any time, and there are those powerful martial arts masters. She must find a place to settle down and make a good living. She thought of the place just now, those bulging bags, will there be any food inside? How can I take it out? Chen Fan walked and thought, feeling embarrassed to talk to someone. Speaking requires effort, so let them save some effort. She looked at the sky, the earth, and those people. The backs of those grandparents and grandchildren caught her attention the most. Although thin and weak, they were still straight, not as hunched as refugees. Their footsteps were also light and agile. Chen Fan looked at it for a while before regaining consciousness. Why did she just stare at the back of a little girl and keep looking? Xiang Jian patted the ink paper and said, "Tell me, what happened on your end just now?" Thank you very much to the cute kids who checked in, love you all. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Feeling Bad in the Heart. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Feeling bad in the heart. Upon hearing Xiang Jian ask him, Mo Jian's expression was not very good. He adjusted his expression before starting to tell Xiang Jian. When the coachman got off the car carrying a large bag of grain, he was preparing to distribute it to the refugees on the way. Foman instructed the refugees to arrange their meals one by one, with each family distributing 1 kilogram of food. Then, Mo Jian and the others watched as many families lined up in groups of 3 or 5 on the road. Zhang Xi was still surprised. Mo Jian had already removed the whip from his waist and swung it towards a child, causing a woman in the nearby crowd to scream in panic. The whip took a slight turn and was retracted. The woman breathed a sigh of relief and quickly ran over to hug the child. A man followed up and kicked the woman, saying, "Stinky woman, asking you to scream has ruined my business." The whip wrapped around the man and pulled him into mid-air, throwing him out of the crowd. The voice of Mo Jian immediately came over. Taking advantage of opportunism and hitting women, what kind of man are you? As soon as the man landed, he burst out a vulgar sentence and was rolled up by the ink paper before falling silent. Mo Jian swung a whip into the air and said, "Line up family by family. The crowd has undergone some changes." The coachman pulled out a small bag of grain and prepared to hand it to a family who had been queuing up honestly just now. However, he saw dozens of eyes on the field shooting at the family in unison, indicating that they would dare to grab it if they dared to pick it up. The coachman immediately withdrew his hand. The butler asked Zhang Xi softly, "Do you want to send them one by one?" Zhang Xi was silent for a while and said, "Let's cook congee. When there is no food, we can still be stable. When there is food, there will be more accidents." The 2 coachmen carried down a bucket of water, and the housekeeper took them to set up a pot to cook congee. A small group of people began to stir up. Qingji pulled out half of his sword, and the cold light from the forest made the group tremble all over before they became honest. But not long after, more and more people were eager to move, and then, like a burst flood, a large group of people rushed towards the 3 carriages, quickly jumping into the front room and blocking the carriage. Mo Jian swung a whip and rolled the 2 who had climbed onto the carriage out. Others continued to surge forward. Qingji immediately inserted his sword, pushed his palms out, and a powerful airflow rushed towards the crowd, forcing them back a few steps. The overwhelming pressure quickly spread in the air, and more refugees showed signs of nervousness and fear, sitting down obediently. The water and rice grains in the pot began to roll, and a faint aroma of rice drifted towards the tip of the nose, with a hint of joy on the faces of the children. Everything seemed fine at first, but a few women rushed up to the young master and said they wanted to follow him like cows and horses, which scared the young master and made him take a few steps back. Mo Jian said angrily. Upon hearing this, Xiang Jian also frowned. What do you say about being a cow and a horse? Is it so easy to be a cow and a horse? Is it okay to pull carts on farmland? We just ran into a young master with a good temperament. If we were someone with a bad temper, we would have kicked him out long ago, and he could still be approached by them. If we were someone with a heart full of blood, there would be a lot of blood on that side. Xiang Jian looked worried and said, the young master must not feel well in his heart. He would never have thought that some refugees would be like that. If he were indifferent, he wouldn't have felt uncomfortable. We weren't specifically here for disaster relief. But he also had compassion and thought of helping when he saw a disaster on the way. The result was. How about practice? Mo Jian swept away his anger just now and became a bit casual. Children grow up like this, but the process is a bit painful. He could have. Forget it, seeing people today can also open up a bit in the future. Hey, keep up a bit. Chen Fan and the others have been walking silently for an hour, stopping to rest. She looked up at the sun and said, well, it's setting down a bit. She has a clear idea in her mind. She went to talk to Zhou Qiang again and said, it's not easy for you to hold on until now, right? We grow a lot of food in our family, and both men, women, and children are quite capable of working. Our village is still backed by the mountains, so we can save some food and add some wild vegetables and games. We have gradually cooked through it, and there is still some food reserves. But some people can't survive. In winter, there were a few snows, and many of the trees and grass that hadn't dried to death froze to death, eating less. Some weak and poor elderly people in houses with limited food left even hungry, sick, and cold. Those few snows made us store a lot at home, waiting for boiling water to drink and cook rice. Once the snow melts, the earth will be nourished. Are there any wild vegetables to eat in spring? She watched as Zhou Qiang took 2 sips of water and continued to ask. Zhou Qiang nodded and said, yes. This spring, wild vegetables and grass have grown on the slopes of the fields. The trees that haven't died have also grown tender leaves, but as soon as they grow, they are plucked and eaten, and as they grow, they are eaten again. One after another, they are plucked, and the poplar, willow, and elm trees eat whatever they have. In previous years, elm money skewers were all over the trees, and the Chinese tune head was enough for a village to eat. But this year, the picking was too fast and fierce, and soon every tree was bare, even the bark was peeled off and eaten. Wild vegetables and wild grass were also eaten as soon as they sprouted green. People have dug up roots to cook and eat, and they dare not expose even a single weed on the ground. Chen Fan couldn't help but laugh. So now that you've all come out, wild vegetables and weeds should dare to come out of the land. Maybe by now, they've all grown lush green. We can't eat anymore. We came out because our hometown was flooded. When we were young, it rained a few times in a row, and we ran fast. As soon as the water flooded the farmland, we started packing things, and then the water flooded to the threshold. We didn't have much way to leave the village, and the soil and stones on the mountain washed down a lot. Many families even had their houses washed away. The young man's voice choked up. Chen Fan didn't ask again, and her mood was also a bit heavy. As soon as she arrived here, she was exposed to famine and misfortune. The information she learned made her very sad. Will she also endure hunger here? How should she survive in this era? She probably knew the date a bit. Xiaoman started counting a few days, plus the 12 days they had been on their way. It was now the season from Mangzhong to the summer solstice, and it was time to finish harvesting wheat and rapeseed, and transplanting rice seedlings. I just don't know how many days it will be for Mangzhong. She wanted to know more precisely, but couldn't help but ask, what day is today? What day is the day of the harvest? Zhou Qiang gave her a strange look and said, "Today is May 22nd, and the 13th day of awning is coming. By May 26th, it will be the summer solstice." Zhou Qiang has one of his biggest strengths. When you ask him something, he will say a lot of other related things, which can help you learn more information. The day of the summer solstice in Mangzhong is around June 20th in the Gregorian calendar, right? She left a few days after the college entrance examination, and it was also summer here, so the time difference was not significant. If she falls into winter, she will be miserable. She is dressed in a single garment, frozen to death, and doesn't fit in with the surroundings. She suddenly thought of something. Is it the rainy season now? Why hasn't it rained yet? End of this chapter. Chapter 7. You have a fragrance on you. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. You have a fragrance on you. Zhou Qiang sighed and said, plum rain, maybe not rain. There wasn't much rain last year, and there were some comfortable days in early summer. The day was clear, the morning and evening were cool, and the clothes were dry every day. As a result, once these comfortable days passed, it was already midsummer. It wasn't even until the summer solstice or summer heat, and the air temperature was quite high. I had been sunbathing for several days, and then there was no rain. There is a rainy season, so most of the states and counties mentioned by the young man are located in the Jianghuai River basin. The situation he mentioned has some impression on Chen Fan. It's an empty plum. In the year of the empty plum, there is likely to be a severe drought. Is it possible that there will be a late plum rain this year? Chen Fan asked him. Zhou Qiang nodded and said, it's possible. However, if the summer solstice allows for the arrival of plum blossoms, it's not too late. With a large number of people walking on the road now, it's good to be a little late for the arrival of plum blossoms, otherwise you'll suffer if you get wet on the road. Xiang Jian and Mo Jian had already returned to the caravan and entered the carriage of Zhang Xiai. They bowed and sat down, relaying the conversation between Chen Fan and Zhou Qiang to Zhang Xiai. She really asked that guy what day is today? Feng'an asked. Yes, Xiang Jian nodded. That guy gave her a strange look. Feng'an smiled and said, she still doesn't know how to gather information without showing any trace, but it will get better in the future. She's just a bit confused now. He looked at Zhang Xiai again and pointed to the sky. She really came from outside, right? Zhang Xiai remained noncommittal and said, maybe she has good hiding skills. Feng'an didn't say much, waved his hand slightly, and Xiang Jian and the others bowed and left. Chen Fan sat in a daze for a while, then went to chat with the few children. The sound of wheels approaching, Chen Fan casually turned his head to take a look. She saw 3 carriages and 2 riders, with slender figures and serious faces. She only glanced and then lowered her head. Although the carriage is not luxurious, such a large battle is probably not an ordinary family. 5 horses, 3 attendants or guards, the coachman doesn't look crooked or cracked. Can this be an ordinary family? Encountering someone with a bad temper, she might get whipped by the other person if she looks at them a few more times, right? She lowered her head and glanced at the refugees beside her, who also lowered their heads. So well trained. Do you have any curiosity to watch for a while longer? Why can't children resist looking up? Chu Sheng and Qin Zheng lifted the curtain slightly and leaned against the gap to look at Chen Fan, but Chen Fan quickly lowered his head. The 2 of them put down the curtains and sat upright, one rubbing their palms and the other shaking their small fists. Did you see her big long legs? They're so long, you must be very tall, right? Her shoes are so strange, I haven't seen them before. From afar, she looked so cool and charming just now when she was fighting, and sitting there now is so quiet and lazy. Her face is so black and beautiful, how could there be such a beautiful person? I really want to get off the car and talk to her. What should I do? When I arrive at my place of residence, I must ask Mo Jian and his team what it means to fall from a tree, no, from mid-air. What exactly did we miss? Qin Jing pinched her and said, please calm down. Chu Xing was choked to the point of taking a breath, but did not make a sound of alarm. She couldn't help but lift the curtain a little more and look over, blocked by a pile of refugees who couldn't see. She turned back in frustration. The carriage convoy rumbled to the front, and the refugees gradually raised their heads and began to whisper. Not curious. Impossible. They sat for a while again, got up, and continued walking forward. Chen Fan looked at the sky and thought that next time he stops, it's probably time to camp, right? The carriage team was moving rapidly and soon arrived at a fork in the road. Going forward would lead to Yuanfeng County, and turning left would lead to Xingping County. Zhang Xi handed Fengman a roll of paper and asked him to bring it to Chu Xing. Fengman got off the carriage and instructed Chu Xing to stay. Chu Xing's face lit up with joy. Seeing everyone looking at her, he immediately straightened his expression. Fengman said there were no horses, pointed south and then pointed at his feet. Chu Xing's face collapsed and he quickly recovered. With a normal expression, he packed his bag and got off the carriage, jumping forward. When Chen Fan and the others arrived at the intersection, Chu Xing happened to be sitting alone there. The sun is still a bit high at 5 or 6 o'clock in summer, and the sky is still bright. Chu Xing hunched his back and lowered his head, squatting in the open field, facing a solitary cloud in the air, which had a somewhat desolate taste. She looked up and saw Chen Fan and the others with a pitiful expression, standing up. Zhou Chang's grandmother spoke and said, "Girl, why are you here alone?" Chu Xing pointed to the west and said, "I came from over there, I dare not leave anymore." Chen Fan was speechless and looked up at the sky. The old lady showed kindness and said, "It's getting dark today. Miss, let's hurry with us. Walk ahead for another 2 days and you'll reach Yuanfeng County. Yuanfeng County is a good place." Chu Xing happily thanked the old lady and asked her how to address her. The old lady said her surname was Zhou, and Chu Xing sweetly called out Grandma Zhou. The old lady smiled happily. Chen Fan thought the girl's voice was very pleasant and took 2 more glances. Well, this girl looks pretty good and dresses well. Although it's an old cloth garment, it's smooth. Everyone walked through the fork in the road and then headed south together. The sun slowly set towards the horizon, and the sky gradually dyed with a few strands of orange and silver gray, and then gradually diffused into a green and dark color. The group stopped, set up the pot, and began to boil water to make congee. Chu Xing opened the package, took out a fist-sized cloth bag, and handed it to Mrs. Zhou. The old lady opened it and saw that it was brown rice. She grinned happily and said, good girl, it's really difficult for you. Chen Fan has nothing on hand and doesn't say anything polite to them." She looked at Zhou Qiang in his cart, as well as the several wooden barrels and large packages on the cart. They could be considered to have a lot of luggage. The 3 newly added households only have 1 or 2 small burdens left. Everyone cooked congee, and Zhou Qiang brought a bowl of congee to Chen Fan. Chen Fan didn't feel hungry, but he still took the bowl and said thank you. She looked at Chu Xing and saw that she had finished congee in 3 or 2 mouthfuls and handed the bowl to Mrs. Zhou. Chen Fan smiled and finished his congee in a few mouthfuls. "How many meals do you eat a day now?" Zhou Qiang said that they now eat 2 meals a day. He said that all the dry food has been used up and there is still some rice left to cook congee. "Who will be on duty today?" "My father and I are on duty in the first half of the night, while my second aunt and second uncle are on duty in the second half of the night. There are actually only 3 adult men in such a large family, and the rest are women and children." Chen Fan nodded and said, "Brother Zhou, hurry up and go eat. I can also be worth the first half of the night." Zhou Qiang took the porridge bowl and left. The crowd spread a few pieces of cloth and sat and lay together. Chen Xiaoya approached Chen Fan and sat beside him. She is the 6-year-old younger sister of the siblings, who has been following Chen Fan all day. Chen Fan even hugged her for a while. Chen Fan found a tree and sat down, leaning his back against something to feel more comfortable, even though the bark was rough and uncomfortable. Chen Xiaoya leaned against the tree and said, "Sister, you have a fragrance on your body. Smell it well." End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Access Space. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 9. Yuanfeng County is so good. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Yuanfeng County is so good. Has your dream come true? She remembered the thoughts she had when she fell asleep and pinched herself again. It hurt. It's not a dream. Her experience last night really happened. She really has a portable space, and it was that space that brought her to this era. Can she control the items in that space with her mind or remotely? Haha. Chu Sheng looked at Chen Fan with a bewildered and joyful expression, puzzled. She had an intuition that what happened this morning was related to Chen Fan, but she had no evidence and didn't know how to understand it. Chen Fan looked around again. She couldn't remember how many times she had done this kind of action of looking around. A lot of land is wet, and of course, there are no wild vegetables left. They have been uprooted or picked up by those people. The place where they camped was not wet, and the tree where she slept was also not wet. Is it so precise? She listened attentively, as if there were cheers in the distance. Well, it's great. Many people have benefited from it. It is understandable that the space is so large, and the range of things falling is a bit wider. People were ecstatic for a while, calmed down, and began to doubt. After only a moment of confusion, they were overjoyed again and knelt down to worship the heavens, grateful for their mercy. People began to cook congee, and congee contained wild vegetables they had just obtained in the morning. Aunt Fong brought Chen Fan a bowl of congee. Chen Fan picked it up. Bowl or ceramic bowl? The millet porridge is a little thin, the rice grains are not much, and the porridge soup is a little green. They didn't mention rice just now, and they didn't put rice in congee. Is it because the rice didn't fall out? Chen Fan took a mouthful of congee and tasted a little salty. She looked at those people, and their faces were also surprised. I don't know what kind of wild vegetable it is, where it grows, and how it grows. It has a slightly salty taste and a good taste. She glanced at Chu Sheng, who also had a surprisingly good expression. With the addition of salt, everyone seemed to immediately gain strength, and when they set off, they all had a bit of a strong and spirited demeanor. Chen Xiaoya still held a wild vegetable in her hand, saying it was even more beautiful than flowers. Chen Fan looked at the grass and saw green leaves stretching outwards, blooming like chrysanthemums. She doesn't know any wild vegetables, she can only look at their appearance. She stretched out her hand and compared it to the wild vegetables. The leaves were as long and thin as her fingers, like the leaves of orchids, and as moist as aloe vera. The surface of the leaves was very smooth. Chen Xiaoya carefully pinched a small piece of leaf for Chen Fan. Chen Fan took it over and chewed it for a while. It was a bit bitter, but light and not unpleasant, with a special salty taste. It tasted tender, fragrant, and a bit fishy. It's really an extraordinary experience. In the morning, their energy was relatively strong, and as they walked, they caught up with a group of people with poor foot strength. The ground here is dry and didn't get soaked in that water. The people's expressions are not as spirited as they are. There are also those with better foot strength who catch up with them and surpass them. There isn't much that's too old or too young among those people. Everyone walked into a dry forest, traversed 500 to 600 meters, and finally finished walking through the forest. Some people say it's a pear grove. Oh. The fruit tree industry in Xingping County is quite good. Zhou Qiang came to find Chen Fan and said, "If we walk fast today, we should be able to get close to Yuanfeng County by nightfall." Chen Fan turned around and said, "Didn't you say you had to leave for 2 days yesterday? 2 days and 1 day, you can handle it." "I can handle it. A few days ago, I didn't have much strength to walk slowly, but today I have more strength. As we approach the city gate, we can also rest more." He picked up a little one and quickened his pace. Chen Fan looked at Zhou Qiang and the others as they strode forward. They were just replenishing their salt and gaining strength, as if they had taken a powerful pill, their bodies full of energy. She picked up Qian Xiaoya, and Chu Xing also picked up a little girl. The group quickened their pace for 2 hours and sat down to rest. Zhou Qiang had the strength today and sat for a while before starting to chatter. "Life in Yuzhou, Shizhou, and Pingzhou is not very easy. When we arrived in Dakong County, we found that it was also dry, and the people had already left, so we continued to walk. When we reached Yongchang County, there was no hope, and when we reached Xingping County, the people of Xingping County also fled. Even if there was a place to stay, we could have stayed long ago." Chen Fan sighed in his heart. "They have escaped here, and countless others are still fleeing this way. But here is also a drought, and they will continue to flee. Yuanfeng County is very good." Chen Fan asked him. Zhou Qiang nodded straight and said, "Yuanfeng County is really good. I have been there before. The rice yield there is very high, and several states in the east are growing rice. Qingzhou, Xianzhou, Chongzhou, and Jingzhou are all hometowns of fish and rice." Zhou Qiang looked envious. "Yuanfeng County is not dry anymore. There are months when it doesn't rain everywhere. Yuanfeng County can't die from drought for several months." Zhou Qiang said, "Yuanfeng County is blessed with so many rivers, ponds, ditches, and lakes, with enough water. Even if the rivers and ponds are bottomed out, a deep well can still fetch water from the ground. No matter how dry they are, there are still plants on the ground. We can't see even a little green when we dig there. When the rain washes away, the soil and stones run away. They have many trees on the mountains, and the soil won't wash away. Won't there be a flood in Yuanfeng County? There must be a lot of rain in places with many rivers and ponds. It will be full after several rainstorms. Yuanfeng County doesn't have floods. They are really lucky that rainstorm will not flood them in the next half-month." Chen Fan was tempted. Since Yuanfeng County is so good, she will work hard to settle down and survive in Yuanfeng County. Chen Fan was deeply grateful to Zhou Qiang for providing her with a lot of information, so she didn't feel lost in this era. But next, she felt clumsy in her language and couldn't talk anymore. Both of their conversations were about drought, lamenting the hardships of life, and she didn't know how to start with something easy to talk about. Talking, eating, and playing seem inappropriate. People are busy farming and making a living, eating is survival, and playing is luxury. Don't accidentally talk about sad things again. Talking about Zhang's parents and Li's short story, she doesn't want to. She didn't dare to ask what dynasty this was. He looked at her with strange eyes all day yesterday. It's so difficult, so frustrating. Chen Fan looked at the sky, and the sunlight began to intensify. She had to lower her head again. Fortunately, they didn't rest for long before continuing their journey. Chen Fan carried the woman's eldest daughter De Hua on his back this time, and Qian Xiaoya ran along with her. The eldest daughter didn't want to, but Chen Fan said she had to be willing to leave some strength to take care of her younger sister, so she reluctantly agreed. Carrying Cheng's eldest daughter on his back, he replaced her with the woman's youngest daughter, Xiaohua. Chu Sheng has good physical strength and has always been carried by children. Chen Fan thought of the horse racing team that passed by yesterday. There are 3 attendants, 2 riding horses, and 1 sitting in the front room of the 3rd carriage. If a carriage seats a man and a carriage seats a woman, then the girl may be on one of the carriages. She is very similar to her own situation, her clothes are not very dusty, and her shoes are also relatively clean. She didn't have a worried expression on her face, unlike those refugees who had been suffering for a long time. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Revealing Identity. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Revealing Identity. There is an old man lying motionless on the roadside ahead. A few people gathered around crying. Chen Fan asked Zhou Qiang, "Do you have a shovel?" Zhou Qiang nodded. "There is a shovel, but we can't bury him here. We still need to find the cemetery. Someone from Yuanfeng County will come and transport him away. The people in Yuanfeng County still care about this. We didn't encounter anyone pulling corpses yesterday," Chen Fan said. "Maybe we happened to have walked somewhere else. We met a group of people yesterday. We walked all the way. Did you see a body on the way?" This is also true. In the era of disaster, starving people traveled thousands of miles, but Chen Fan has not encountered the situation of walking 2 steps to see a corpse, and walking 3 steps to see a pile of white bones in the past 2 days. The refugees she encountered on this journey were all walkable. Those who fell down have probably been restrained. Chen Fan asked, "Why do people in Yuanfeng County do these things?" Zhou Qiang said, "There are several kind-hearted people in Yuanfeng County, who apply kanji and medicine to stop the dead. Their business is very big, and good people will be rewarded." Someone is coming in the opposite direction, pulling a cart and carrying agricultural tools. They stopped, took out a mat, wrapped the old man on the ground, and carried him onto the cart. The cart is already piled up. Those people covered their mouths and noses with cloth and wore gloves on their hands. Moving away the old man, they sprinkled another layer of lime on the ground. This is Chen Fan's first time experiencing an ancient disaster relief scene, and his heart is deeply moved. In ancient times, people were very afraid that there would be no one to see them off after death, so they had to take care of their children to prevent aging. However, not all children and grandchildren would be able to see them off properly. On the way to escape, someone came to give a seat to the fallen strangers, allowing them to bury themselves in peace. This is righteousness. Chen Fan is full of admiration. She folded her hands and respectfully bowed to those people. There are also many refugees who bend down to them and hold their fists in various postures. Those people were in a hurry, nodded in response, and then continued on their journey. Seeing someone die, I feel sad in my heart. Seeing someone righteous, feel grateful. The crowd walked quietly. The sun has risen a lot again, and Zhou Qiang said to take a break when walking to the forest ahead. After passing through the forest, you can see the distant city gate. They walked into the forest and sat down. Of course, the forest is also dry. Zhou Qiang said it was a jujube tree forest. Aunt Fang gave Chen Fan 2 wild vegetables, which were different from what Chen Fan saw in the morning, with thicker leaves. Chen Fan put them into his mouth and chewed them. They were still good, tender and juicy, with a good taste. It seems that this batch of wild vegetables that fell out are of good quality. A few people walked a little further and formed a circle. Chen Fan turned his head to look elsewhere. Chu Xing walked over and handed Chen Fan a bag of water. Chen Fan said thank you and took it over. Chu Xing was a bit surprised, he picked it up so easily. "Do you doubt it? Please politely refuse." Chen Fan's heartbeat is a bit fast. Isn't it a big gamble for her to take over so readily? She feels so exciting. The water bag is small and exquisite. Hee, there's no trace hidden. Chen Fan didn't have to drink without hesitation. She looked up, poured 2 sips of water, tightened the plug, and returned it to Chu Xing. Chu Xing looked at Chen Fan with bright eyes and said, "My name is Chu Xing. What do you call a girl?" Chen Fan was stunned. Chu Xing spoke to the old lady with the same accent, and this time he spoke to her with a different accent. What was her original accent? My name is Chen Fan. What about your family? They've all gone somewhere else and left me behind. Chu Xing patted his mouth, feeling aggrieved. Sure enough. Can you still catch up with them? Chen Fan asked her. Chu Xing didn't answer and asked Chen Fan, where are your family members? Chen Fan didn't answer, raised his head and lowered it again. She wants to cry. Chu Xing looked at the sky and then at Chen Fan, saying, Are you here alone? Are your family not here? Chen Fan suddenly clenched his fist, his whole body tense. Chu Xing naturally saw the changes in Chen Fan's body. She leaned closer to Chen Fan's ear and said in a soft, mosquito-like voice, I have a sister named Qin Zheng, and we came with the young master. The horse racing team that the girls saw yesterday, my sister and I were on the second carriage. On the first carriage were our young master and the butler. The 3 guards you saw were called Mo Jian, Xiang Jian, and Qin Ji, respectively. There was also a Bai Su who did not follow this time. The 2 younger sisters Wei Jia and Han Yu did not follow either. Chen Fan felt that her voice was light and delicate, but she could hear every word clearly. That's trained, right? What does she mean by revealing her identity so quickly? Chu Xing continued, Miss, you must have thought about me. We know that Miss is not an ordinary person, and we respect such an adventure. We have a strange fate with Mississippi. Respect. They must have seen her suddenly fall out of thin air. Did they see it from a distance? At that time, she just looked around in confusion, not looking too finely or too far, and did not notice the carriage around her. Chu Xing's group of people are different from refugees. They are full of energy, have sharp eyes, and have extraordinary hearing abilities. They saw it with a calm and clear mind, perhaps they had already memorized a lot of the plot. The ancients were able to create so many myths and legends, and their imagination was very rich. However, they did not say what kind of demon she was. They tolerated the occurrence of such a fantasy event and did not exterminate her completely, nor did they expose it to make a big fuss. Chen Fan stood up and respectfully bowed to Chu Xing, silently grateful for their awe and gratitude for saving her life. Chu Xing turned to his side and saluted Chen Fan. What would Qiyuan be? I have some purpose, they want to burn me and kill me to offer sacrifices to people, flags, and heaven. Chen Fan pondered. Chu Xing's soft and clear voice rang in his ear. Don't worry, we won't take you to the blood sacrifice. Chen Fan looked at her in surprise. Does she know how to read her mind? Chu Xing raised his eyebrows. Chen Fan turned her head and wondered if they needed her flesh and blood to make any medicinal introductions. You can still rest assured that you don't need to use your blood and meat to do anything. Chen Fan was surprised again, and Chu Xing was really a good guesser. What is their so-called strange fate? Will an unexpected guest like her be of any help to them? Chu Xing didn't speak this time. Chen Fan looked at her strangely and smiled, this is not something I can discuss. Chen Fan turned his head back and remained silent. They did indeed save her life, but she also felt a sense of being targeted. The group watched as the 2 girls bit their ears for a while and then saluted each other, both curious. When Chen Fan and the others looked over, several of them had bright eyes and were hesitant to speak. Well, I finally have a worried expression beyond my livelihood. Chu Xing took out a roll of paper and handed it to Chen Fan, you can take a look for a while and then give it to me. End of this chapter.